So I'm very thankful for you to be here and with us today. So my name is Margaux Larre-Perez, and so I'm a doctor in cognitive psychology. So I understand the struggle of everything we're going to talk about today. And I work as an open science trainer at the Université Paris Cité, which is in Paris, France. I work for the university libraries. And so just to give you a little bit of a context, so the university I worked in, part of the Circle U Alliance, is a public research university, which is called an experimental establishment, and it's the merger between two older universities, which were Paris Diderot and Paris Descartes, and we have approximately 62,000 students and 3,500 graduate students. And here is a picture of our historical headquarters where I actually work. I just forgot to tell you that if you have questions, please use the chat, and I will come back to you along the presentation. So if you could answer that question, I would like to know which university you're from. I listed the university from the Circle U Alliance, but if you are not part of these universities, you have a possibility to say that you're coming from another institution. Okay. But you're from everywhere. That's great. A lot of people from Pisa and Belgrade. Oslo. Some people from Paris as well. Cara, I send a link so you can go to the voting, to the poll, actually. Okay. So a lot of you from Belgrade and Pisa. Okay. I'm just going to ask you now if you're master student, PhD students, postdoc, if you're tenured, congratulations, or if you are a librarian or someone else. And you can just be there because you're curious, and that's totally fine. Okay, a lot of PhD students, a few postdoc, someone in the administrative roles. Okay. Okay, well, I hope you're going to learn some things today. Obviously, the things are going to be different depending on the discipline you're working in. So if you could just tell me in which discipline you're working, very broadly. Okay. That's a lot of different things. Linguistics, tourism, archaeology, microelectronics, history, linguistics. Okay. Artificial intelligence, diabetes research. Oh, I see a lot of linguists. Okay, well, that's awesome that you're all coming from very different disciplines. I think it's pretty great. And that also shows that open science related topics are of interest for everyone. So that's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to move on and tell you what you are going to learn, I hope, or just see again today. So I'm just going to tell you a few words about open science because what we're going to talk today is part of a much broader discussion on open science. And we're going to look a little bit back to the history of open access and where we're at today, because That's pretty much what the title was talking about. And we are also going to look at kind of like the darker side of the open access ecosystem, which is going to be an overview of predatory publishing. So a few words on open science. Open science, if you are not already familiar with what it entails, is the practice of science in such a way that others can collaborate and contribute, where research data, lab notes, and other research processes are freely available under terms that enable reuse, redistribution, and reproduction of the research and its underlying data and methods. So the goal of open science is to have a wide opening of research processes, even if it's, data or papers, anything about processes, about code, software, and in a way that is not only free, but that also enable the reuse and redistribution and collaboration. And that's an important part of the open science spirit. In France, we have a plan for open science that has been decided at the minister level, and that is a kind of guide for a French institution and they describe open science pretty much the same way as an unhindered dissemination of results, methods, and products from scientific research. And it emphasized the fact that the opportunity for this spread of open science is dependent on the digital processes, the digital progress to develop open access to publication and to data and source code and research methods. And that's important because we're going to see how actually, obviously, digital progress, the internet, the development of the personal computer has a great role to play in the development of open access, notably. So, and just to give you an idea of what open science is about, open science, so basically is, it's a possible way to do your science, but it applies to any scientific process. So obviously there's an open side of the access to publication, but it's also true of data, science evaluation with alternative open metrics, open tools, open software. So yes, pretty much every part of the scientific process has an open side, if you are interested in open science. So just to make that, so to make a long story short, it's a worldwide movement for knowledge dissemination. And it includes a lot of different activities, from publishing to software development, citizen science as well. And it's beneficial for society and for you as a young researcher. And we are going, obviously, to talk about things that, you will see the benefits for you, I hope. So we are going to talk now about open access and go back in time to look a little bit about the history of open access. Why did we actually need open access at some point? Why did that emerge as a need in research? And where we're at today, especially at the turn of the decade. And the last decade has been eventful, and especially with the rise of the open processing charges model of academic publishing, and we will talk about that. And we'll see where it's going and what the future may hold in terms of sustainable open access. So if you're not familiar with the publishing system, I guess some of you may already have published already, but some of you may not. The traditional publishing system is working in a pretty peculiar way compared to a lot of different industries. And you will see how it works. Why I'm saying that very quickly. So in the traditional publishing system, the author, so it's you, you have an article to publish, and so you're sending it to editor, a scientific publisher, and so you are giving the content of your research to a publisher. So you're sending a paper with everything you've done, etc. And we are not going to talk about the peer review. Let's say you're accepted, congratulations, and you are going to be published in a journal. And so the paper is published, and then if other people, let's say students or researchers, want to read your paper, they have to actually pay to access either the paper or pay a subscription to the journal. And the way it works usually is that the library in the university where you work or study has a subscription to the journal or not, which allows you to actually read the paper. And when I say that it's a peculiar market and a traditional publishing system here, is that the reader, which when I mean the reader, either another scientist or a student, or you actually, you are the same person as the author. So it's a pretty much circular graph here, meaning that the reader is very often going to be the author. And so the same person that is going to publish is the same person that is going to need to read. So the money is often going to come pretty much from the same source, meaning the university, whether from the research money, because that was used to actually make the research that end up in the journal, or money for the subscription. So yes, so that's pretty much how it works. And you may think, well, that's okay, that's interesting. There may be some problems with that. And you will be right in the sense that, I mean, it's not a new thing. And probably some of you were not born or just toddlers when this paper, for example, that pretty much summarized the issue has been published in 1998. This was already an issue in the 1990s. And here you have pretty much a summary in this article from the New York Times of the problem that in publishing. Quote, in fact, researchers says academia is a paradise for publishers. First, the public pays for most scientific research through, for example, the National Science Foundation, which is an American funder. Then universities pay the salaries of scientists who do virtually all the writing, reviewing, and editing. Universities sometimes even provide free office space to journals. Finally, authors typically sign over their copyrights to publishers, who can sometimes bring in many millions of dollars a year in subscriptions for a single high-priced journal, subscription paid by university libraries, supported by tax dollars, and tuition. So I hope you understand now the circular things I was talking about. So just to make a long story short, a lot of people thought that this will be solved by the arrival of the internet and the personal computer, in the sense that the need to rely on traditional infrastructure for publishing, distributions was going to not be necessary anymore. Like anybody could be able to actually have a journal, a server, and actually publish its own journal if it was going to be only on the internet. However, it's not really what happened. And actually the digital progress that we had in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and the arrival of the personal computer coincided with the consolidation of the market around a few powerful actors, meaning that you had less and less publishers, and they kind of became bigger and took more market shares. And they used that also to actually hike up the prices, because there were less people, and so less companies, and so they could make the prices higher. And one of the rationale to increase subscription was that they had actually costs related to the technology that they didn't have before. And it's a market that is actually pretty inelastic, meaning that I don't want to say things that may make economists here unhappy, but it's an inelastic demand, meaning that you cannot just go to another journal to get the same article that you may have in like journal A, you're not going to have the same journal B, like things cannot be replaced. So you have very few possibilities in terms of like what you can actually consume. And you also had, so very competitive market, just a few companies on the market, and the start of what we call bundling practices, meaning that subscription were now bought in bulk. The publishers would not let you buy subscription just for one journal, but ask you to buy for several journals at the same time, even if you actually don't want the other journals. And we ended up with a price explosion and an increase in publishers' revenue in the last 30 years, basically. So here, what you see on your right is basically the inflation in the green-blue line, and the prices associated with journal subscription in red. So they increased far much faster than inflation, and from basically the mid-1980s. So you have pretty much now 5 big companies in academic publishing. Sometimes it's called the big 4 because the last one is omitted. It depends. But so the big companies are Elsevier, Springer Nature, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, and the American Chemical Society. In some fields, it represents the vast majority of journals on the market. For example, so you see in chemistry and psychology, the percentage of articles that come from a journal that is owned by one of the big 5 is more than 70%. And in terms of market share, in terms of publications, 25% of publications in the world are currently made on a journal that is owned by Elsevier. But it's representing much more in terms of costs than just 25%. But so obviously in arts and humanities, it's less the case, but in some disciplines, it's very hard to publish anywhere else than in one of these big 5 companies. Around almost 10 years ago, there's been a new visibility of these issues that were kind of confided to libraries and research libraries and labs, and but it kind of made its way into the public discourse and domain in the sense that Harvard University said that it could not afford journal publisher prices anymore. And as you probably guess, if Harvard cannot afford something, nobody can. The symbol is big here because it really means that something about the subscription prices and their increase over time. And given that Elsevier was and is still the biggest company on the market, a lot of the actions that were taken to actually try to decrease the prices of fine alternatives were around boycotting Elsevier or having actions against Elsevier. To give you just one of the an example of an initiative, you had the cost of knowledge, that was a petition that was signed by researchers, around almost 20,000 researchers, that were saying that as long as the subscription price will not go down, they will not do any editorial work or publishing with Elsevier. And around that time, that's also when initiatives that are called Black Open Access really took off. Same in the public. I mean, it was talked about a bit more, especially with the launch of Sci-Hub at the end of 2011 and the Aaron Swartz litigation in the United States regarding the downloading of JSTOR library through MIT. So these issues also that were kind of circumventing the law to allow people to access the scientific literature contributed to this movement towards more open access, more immediate open access. And in the same time, because it's also actually a digital era movement, as I was saying, you don't need the traditional infrastructure, you just need a computer and a server. A lot of initiatives popped up online to try to make room for alternative to big publishers, and that's how actually some repositories started. For example, Archive, which is actually much older than we may think. Sometimes that Archive is more than 30 years old. AL in France, that is pretty much the same. I mean, it's an open archive for all disciplines, and that started in 2001. And that's also how mega journals, native open access journals, were born. And I'm thinking of, for example, PLOS ONE in 2006. That was the first peer review open access mega journal. And when I say native open access, it means that this is a journal that never had any subscription option. So that's a journal that is only open access from the very beginning. And I will explain to you the differences between different type of open access right now, so you will not be lost. But it was just to tell you how all these things kind of developed in the same time, and how it's shaped the field, the open science domain, that ecosystem that we have today. So just to give you an idea of where we are today, I would say that there are pretty much 4 different types of open access today in the ecosystem. And what I was showing you is the circularity of the traditional publishing system. The system was called a reader pays system, because it was through subscription that the model was working, meaning that you had to pay to read, okay? Now we're more in an author pays model of academic publishing, meaning that with open access, so meaning that you don't need to read, to pay to read, there was a need to find another way to actually make the system economically viable. And that's how we're introduced what we're going to call APCs, so article processing charges, meaning that instead of making the reader pay, we are going to make the author pay, because we need to make a way to make this journal exist without making people pay to read. And so we kind of shift. Now we're in this model much more, and we're going to see how it actually influenced the industry. So basically now you have gold OA open access, which is pretty much PLOS ONE, or all the pluses, a lot of journals that you will think about when you think about open access. So meaning that all the articles and related content are available for free immediately on the journal website. There's no subscription option. The publisher does charge you for an APC, meaning that the author actually pays for the paper to be available online for free. And these publication costs, I just give you that because that's going to be important, after are paid by the researcher, or his or her research institution, or the funder. We also have Diamond Open Access, which is a model in which all the articles and related content are available for free immediately on the journal website, but the publisher does not charge author for a publishing fee. In this model, not the reader and the author, well, they don't pay, none of them, but someone pays, obviously. But it's, you can guess, a non-profit form of open access publishing. And in this case, these publications are internalized by non-commercial organization, association, network, or public institution. So it's going to be things like university presses, or university based scientific publications and stuff like that. You also have hybrid OA, which is going to be the way the former traditional system kind of evolved very often, in the sense that article and related content will be behind a paywall and available through a subscription. So until now, we're still in the former model. But if you want, you can pay an option for your article to be for free and not behind a paywall. But in this case, you have to pay for an APC. And we are going to see how a certain number of institutions are not funding this type of OA for reasons that pretty much makes sense if you think about the economic model of this kind of publishing. And there's also a last one called Greenaway, in which the article and related contents are available for free on a repository, which is a website, a server where things can be archived for good. And IPC may have been paid depending on whether the article was published by a traditional publisher before or not. But if it's not the case, it means that you put a preprint, and that's the only way you actually publish the article, by putting a preprint on the repository and not by submitting it to an traditional publisher. And this hosting is free of charge. I know that this is a lot of information, but I hope with examples and with the discussion, it's going to be clearer for you. But I understand if it's a lot of information, it's not an easy topic, and we'll have time for questions. I was saying that hybrid journals may not be reimbursed, like the costs will not be paid by the institutions, because obviously there's something called double dipping in this type of economic model, meaning that actually these companies make money both on the subscription side and on the APC side, meaning that they can actually charge the same institution twice for the same journal. And so notably the Plan S, which is part of the plan made in direction by the Coalition S, which is European group of scientific funders, including the European Commission. They have decided together that funders that are part of this coalition will not support the hybrid model of academic publishing. And so they will not pay for these APCs, except if they're part of what they call a transformative agreement. And that's a big part of where we are today with hybrid journals. Transformative agreements are for journal and publisher that engage in the transition to full and immediate open access. And under these agreements, institutional funders agree to finally support hybrid journals as this transition is underway within a defined time frame. And it means that as long as journals accept to actually change in the future and go to actually gold open access at some point in time, the APCs will be paid by funders for a certain length of time. This length of time being right now 2024. But to make a long story short, an important amount of hybrid APCs are still paid by institutions, funders, under the time of these agreements. And the way the kind of shape it takes, you may have heard maybe about read and publish agreements. Read and publish agreements are agreements that are between, institutions and publisher, and they allow you to read, but they also pay for some APCs beforehand. So there's a number of articles that are already paid in the term of this agreement, and researcher can actually publish for free, but obviously the university actually paid for the APC. So now that you heard about APCs, and that I told you about these article processing charges, how much do you think that it represents? So there's a question on the WooClap. So if you're still connected to the WooClap, so I give you this time period because it actually is the time period for which we have data right now. How much do you think that it represents? Money-wise in US dollars? I say, yes, we're in the world, okay. So I see that you have very different conception of what it represents. I see a lot of you think that it's a lot of money. Okay, so I don't know if some of you actually are correct. Yes, 13% are correct. It was, so the number is 1.06 billion dollars. So, and it's a conservative estimate. But so the idea is that it's been estimated that globally authors paid the oligopoly of academic publishers 1.06 billion in publications fees on the 2015-2018 period. Obviously, all the big publishers are not having the same strategies regarding what it actually means for them in terms of access. For example, Springer Nature has more gold journals making more money on gold APCs, and Elsevier making more money on hybrid APCs. So meaning that they have less gold journals compared to Springer Nature, which is making the most of its money from gold journals. And in terms of disciplines, the natural sciences are obviously, well, I say obviously because as we've seen with the oligopoly of academic publishers, they're very dependent on these publishers. And so natural science are what we represent in this count 450 million in APCs, medical and health science, and you see humanities are much less impacted by this as they rely less on the oligopoly of academic publishers. So we're basically the new serial crisis of in terms of like we have APCs now, and we just had in France a retrospective study on the evolution of the APC costs compared to the subscriptions. And we are now in France, the APCs represented 30 million euros in 2020 compared to the subscription prices for France that was 90 million. So it's now 1/3 of what it costs to have subscriptions is spent on APCs. So it's on top of subscriptions. So it's cost now more money actually to publish than it was when we only had subscriptions. And my institution pays 250,000 euros in APCs in 2021. Which is a lot, as you can see, because it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the 6th establishment institution in France in terms of APCs. What the future holds, what are the strategies for sustainable open access? Because actually a lot of countries are saying, well, that's not sustainable. We're not going to be able to continue paying as much APCs. And so from my observer and like research librarian point of view, two things are currently happening. First, the strategies are that Greenaway is getting reinforcement with notably the right retention strategy. So we're trying to keep the copyrights to actually make Green OA stronger because it costs less money, and developing diamond open access, meaning non-for-profit publishing that is actually so in which the people don't pay to publish, but don't pay to read either, and less support over time for transformative agreement. And all of this together as a goal to decrease APC expenses. And so we have, the European Commission, through some institutions, and the French funder, National Funder for Research, ANR, they created an action plan for diamond open access to actually push further diamond open access, and it's been signed by CNRS, which is the biggest French research institution, Harvard Library, but now we have a lot of institutions all around Europe and the world actually pushing for this diamond plan. The Plan S is pushing its members and actually requiring its members to actually have a right retention strategy in place, meaning that researchers have to keep their rights on their publication when they publish through Creative Commons licenses. And so this is a pretty complicated issue, and just to show you, I found 2 universities from the Circle U Alliance that have a page on this, right retention strategies, because they already adopted it. CNRS in France also. But so websites exist for that. And for example, the Plan S has the resources to explain to you how to use this right retention strategy. And I'm saying that because you probably will have to apply these strategies very quickly if you haven't done so already. And the Coalition S confirms that they will not be supportive of transformative agreements. So what I told you about the hybrid thing, trying to actually go full open after 2024, because as they actually what they saw right now is that actually these journals are not transforming. They just basically take the money and don't transform. So that's a problem. So they say they will not continue to pay for these transformative agreements. So I know it's a lot. It's pretty complicated. It's not easy, but it will help you. I mean, a lot of the things I said actually will help you to understand how we end up with predatory publishing, because predatory publishing does not come from nowhere. It actually comes from this shift in open access. In academic publishing, from a reader-based model to an author-based model, because with the generalization of APCs, a new market opened. And basically, a lot of people were thinking, well, if institutions are going to pay for APCs, should we not just create a journal, even if it's not really a serious journal, ask for APCs and institution will pay? And that's pretty much how predatory publishing started in terms of the industry. So predatory publishing, what does it mean? What does it entail? So there are some definitions, and I'm going to give you one here. It's a publication that prioritizes self-interest at the expense of scholarship and is characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. I give you a few numbers that we have here. It's more than 1,000 predatory publishers on the Bells list in 2017. You will learn what the Bells list is, but this website doesn't exist anymore. It was a blacklist for predatory publishers. It is thought to it represents 10,000 predatory journals in 2018, possibly 420,000 articles in 2014. But these are all numbers, and we actually may be around 15,000 predatory journals in 2023 right now. Predatory publishing has main characteristics that are on the spectrum of fraudulent activities, if you would say. So I'm taking these informations from a book that is called Predatory Publishing, and is the first comprehensive book on the topic. So predatory publishers provide no or only peripheral peer review, contrary to, for example, vanity presses in the past that are kind of like self-publishing, but they don't tell you they're going to peer review you. But in the case of predatory publishers, they say they will peer review, and they will, and then don't. Predatory publishers ignore or have lesser editorial services for publications, and they often adopt deceptive tactics to entice submission and compel payments. Here are a few examples of pretty easy to spot predatory publishers. It's a kind of a spam email that you may have received, not being very personalized or with a lot of misspellings. You may probably know by now that you are not going to be called by a publisher to ask you to publish. So if it happens, it's probably not real. And so these is the kind of emails a lot of people are getting. And have you already received such emails? I'm interested in knowing whether you received that. Yeah. So the options are, oh, yes, or not yet, because you will. Okay, well, more than 90% of the respondents right now say that, yes, they did. Okay. So, I mean, still a lot of you did, which is not surprising, but yeah. Okay. So how did this happen? Like, how did we end up with predatory publishing? Actually, I'm going just to tell you, I mean, things that I'm going to tell you are pretty much the same reasons why the publishing ecosystem had to change in the late 1980s, 1990s. First, the serial crisis. And so APC-based called open access increased in the 2000s. And so a lot of funders actually paid for these APCs. So you had pretty much a lot of new avenues for money in academic publishing that just required you to have a computer. And that's pretty much the second reason. You had the globalization of the internet, of the personal computer, but also, and that's kind of like where the difference goes. I mean, the point that is important in the development of predatory publishing is that a lot of Western academic practices, known among others as publish or perish, were imported in developing countries that didn't necessarily have the infrastructure or to actually apply the same rules or in academic Western academic countries, and that created the conditions to have predatory publishers. It's going to be clear what I mean in a few minutes. So to know if something was, I mean, if a publisher was predatory, until so in the 2010s, you had a website called Scholarly Open Access that was maintained by Jeffrey Bell, who was a librarian asset professor in the United States, where he actually kept a list that was updated depending on a few rules to actually rule if a publisher was predatory or not. And that was called the Bell's List. The Bell's List doesn't exist anymore because Bell received a lot of harassment and was sued by some publishers that did not like to be included in this list. And currently you have a lot of kind of mirror of this list or other blacklists, but you also have whitelist, and we will talk about that, of publishers that are lists that are curated and that are kind of safe lists of open access publishers. But that was a big moment in understanding predatory publishing. Where are predatory publishers? They are, so here are just the main countries in terms of volume, but it's pretty much not the only countries. India is the biggest provider of predatory publishers, followed by some other Asian countries and Nigeria. And the authors are kind of the overlap, but not entirely, and that's the biggest ones. The entire world is concerned by this. I mean, is part of this. But Nigeria and China are the biggest provider of predatory authors. And that's just what I was just saying right before, is that you had this import of Western publish and perish incentives that have been driving predatory publishing in non-Western countries. And here are a few examples that are taken from the book Predatory Publishing. For example, in Indonesia, many universities require their faculty to publish at least 10% of their publication in English. However, less than 5% of Indonesian can write English proficiently. In China, you have cash rewards depending on the worst of the index journal you published in, and you can actually have pretty big incentives. And if you don't have international publication, you may face some layoff. In Nigeria, universities set requirements for their faculty to be promoted to senior level only if they publish a certain amount of articles in foreign journals. And for example, the Kazakhstan government set a policy in the 2000s that require all PhD students to publish in journal indexed by Scopus. So all these incentives pretty much drive the need to publish fast, to publish sometimes in English as well. And that's how predatory publishing kind of fill a void of journals in which you can publish fast, easily, and that's also pretty much how it became such an industry. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about the risks of publishing in a predatory journal. So obviously, some of these reasons are obvious to you, but some may not be. So obviously, you can tarnish your reputation and your co-authors, or if it's discovered that these journals are predatory, because it means that they don't ask for peer review or very little peer review, and that's so tarnishing your reputation. The article may very well disappear if the journal does, with no record left, especially if the journals don't have, articles don't have a DOI, or they don't appear in scientific databases, contrary to what they sometimes advertise. It can cause issues related to intellectual property, because if you sign off your copyrights to these editors, that can be a problem. And even if it's good science, your article may receive no or very few citations, because a lot of studies show that one of the characteristics of also predatory publishers is that they don't receive citations. So regardless of the quality of the work that is actually published in these journals. And it's actually complicated to decide, or is this publisher predatory? The question now also in the debate on these issues is maybe all the academic publishers are predatory in some way, because they have they take a lot of money, etc. So in some sense, maybe all academic publishing is predatory. But in terms of understanding what kind of practices are implied by predatory, in the consortium Interacademics made this scale of risks that are associated with predatory publishers, typical markers, and obviously you will have, and they exist, I will not cite them, but they exist, some publishers that are mainstream, but still fall into this kind of gray zone of we don't know, or it's debated whether or not they are predatory publishers. So yes, it's not just black or white. Unfortunately, it's the gray zone. And it's not just public journals. So predatory publishing is actually encompasses a lot of different activities, and predatory conferences actually exist as well. Predatory conferences, so I give you a few examples here that you will be able to actually consult. But predatory conferences are basically conferences that happen, but they don't go as a normal conference, meaning that the speakers may not show up. There'll be more emphasis on the partying than the science. So a lot of, or sometimes they just are canceled last minute and you paid for it. So there are a lot of different things as well in predatory conferences. But one of the characteristics, for example, is that the spectrum of topics is very, very large. It can be about neuroscience or in COVID-19. I mean, a lot of different things that don't necessarily go together. And yeah, I mean, they have shady websites. As you can see, are not very professional, but a lot of different hints that you can have on whether or not it's not a real conference. But so this is also something, and it's actually a big industry. And just to give you a few a bit of food for thought, one of the biggest predatory conference organizers in the world is omics. They're not necessarily doing just things about omics science. They're doing a lot about anything really. And for example, one of their conference is used by, I mean, I've been promoted by Philip Morris, the tobacco manufacturer, as a place where they show their work. And it's actually interesting to see how, for example, these kind of companies shift from bogus scientific publication to bogus scientific conferences. And Omics admits that around 60% of its revenue come from pharmaceutical company, which is a big issue, and they sponsor their conference. I'm finishing very fast on other type of predatory publishing that you may not know but exists. Hijack journals. So the web domain for a journal is bought by a fraudulous activity, and they actually pretend to be a journal that actually exists, and so reroute the APCs to them. So here you have the example of the Arctic Journal website, and you may think, well, how am I going to even fall prey of this? Well, because when you type Arctic Journal, the first one that goes up, I mean, the first one in the Google list is actually the hijacked one. And sometimes they even the hijacked journal is actually registered in Web of Science or Scopus sometimes. So it's actually making things much more complicated. And the last one is actually kind of like going deeper into the predatory services. You have predatory indices, so basically fake impact factors. And because Impact Factor is a brand owned by Clarivate. And so you have fake predatory bibliometric indices. And there are, I said, it's a Russian doll of predatory services because they are used by predatory journals to pretend to have impact factors. So these are predatory activities, and their clients are other predatory activities. So it goes really, I mean, it's a whole industry, and that's pretty much what I wanted to show you, and the link with the, the state of academic publishing in the last 30 years. How to know if a journal is predatory? You have a few tools for that. Think, check, submit is an important one. Compass to publish. The whitelist of directory of open access journals, which is pretty much a safe list of open access journals and articles and criteria on the internet, notably by Bell. And again, a list of things you should look at to be sure that that it's not bogus or it looks suspicious. But same thing as the spectrum, you kind of need to think about it and assess the situation. And the solution is rethinking research evaluation. And for example, some countries are actually trying to do something against that. India withdraw is mandatory research publication before PhD thesis submission. And that's a big step because they are, we've seen, the biggest provider of predatory publishers. And there's a coalition in Europe that just started to change research assessment and rely less on bibliometric indicators to actually assess research.